Can't sleep? Neither can I. It's a bit of a tradition, in my case. I'm Simone de Beauvoir, yes, the one on the posters. I spent a lifetime writing about freedom, love, and bad existential choices. Now I'm mostly writing in bed, with lukewarm tea and a sleepy cat named Maurice. Funny how things turn out. At night, I think. And when I think too much, I write. And when I write too much, I make myself a cup of herbal tea. And by the time the tea is finally ready, I realize it's already cold, because I've been thinking too long. I'm in bed now, sleep mask pushed up on my forehead, never over my eyes. That always feels too optimistic. Maurice Merleau-Pouf is curled up on my legs, purring gently. He's a cat, and yes, I named him after a phenomenologist and a fluffy pillow. He sleeps soundly. It's always the ones who don't question anything who sleep best. As for me, I've got this sentence swirling in my head. You've probably heard it. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. They've printed it on tote bags, posters, coffee mugs, even once on a box of tampons. When I saw that, I thought, well, Simone, you've made it. But tonight, I want to rewrite it, just for you. For this hour of the night when the air gets quiet and everything feels both too far and too close. Here's what I'd write instead. One is not born sleepless. One becomes. And do you know why? Because after years of pretending to be calm, pretty, brilliant, understanding, productive, reasonable, inspiring, you end up losing track of who you were before the act started. At night, the forbidden questions sneak back in through the cracked window, the one you left open for fresh air. Can you hear them? Did I say the right thing today? Am I really who I claim to be? Am I free? Ah, freedom. My obsession. My philosophical teddy bear. My eternal headache. I always believed freedom meant saying no. No to conventions. No to roles. No to expectations. No to marriage. No to mandatory motherhood. No to the script someone else wrote for your life. And now, here I am at 3 a.m., still saying no. To sleep. Freedom is saying no, even to sleep. It's a bad joke, I know. But insomnia is a kind of rebellion, a refusal to surrender, and sometimes just a mind that refuses to shut up. You think I'm being dramatic? Maybe. I've always had a flair for the tragic, even when I laugh. People used to tell me, Simone, you're too serious, to which I'd say, it's not me. It's the world. Look around. We expect women to be light, but responsible, attractive, but natural, bold, but never aggressive, free, but never alone. It's an art, really, becoming almost what people expect from you, without ever quite being it. By the way, if you're still awake and enjoying this strange midnight monologue, feel free to like and subscribe. Even Simone de Beauvoir wouldn't mind a bit of validation, as long as it's freely chosen, of course. And you? Be honest. Do you fake it too? At work, in your texts, in your mirror? Do you say, I'm fine, while dragging yourself through sleepless nights? I stopped pretending the day I started writing. It was a stormy afternoon in Paris. Hot, sticky air, a dull migraine, a cold cup of coffee. I grabbed a notebook and started scribbling. Words, fragments, thoughts I had never dared speak aloud. And you know what? I was scared. Because truth, real truth, it's terrifying. It strips away the masks. And masks, even when they itch, can be comforting. But the most dangerous things aren't what we hide. It's what we forget to look for. I've seen people spend their entire lives playing a role they were handed when they were too young to say no. They call it stability. Me? I prefer uncertainty. Late nights, shaky sentences, silence that dares you to ask, what if I did things differently? It's not as scary as it sounds, I promise. You don't have to run off to Chile or throw your phone into a lake. Just start small. Ask yourself this one thing tonight. What would I do if I were truly free? Not tomorrow, not in 10 years, tonight. And don't answer too quickly. Let it sit, like sugar dissolving in tea that's still too hot to drink. Ah, my tea, still too cold. The patriarchy, on the other hand, it sleeps quite well. It even snores. That's how it's always been. The ones who make the rules sleep soundly, and the ones who live under them lie awake. But you're not alone. I'm here. And if you like, I'll tell you a story. Not my whole story. Just the pieces that itch. The parts that wake you up. The thoughts that feel like a secret whispered in the dark. You ready? Then lie back. Breathe. Maurice is already asleep for both of us. And I'll start with the little girl I used to be. The one who hated dresses and refused to play the part. The one who understood far too early that freedom isn't something you wait for. It's something you take. Still with me? Oh dear. I was hoping you'd be snoring by now, but since you're not, let's go deeper. Let's rewind. Before the tea, before the books, before Sartre and all that Parisian metaphysics. Back to the little girl I was. Simone, aged 6, already suspicious of lace and expectations. I was born into a good Catholic bourgeois family, which means I had no shortage of ribbons, prayers, or warnings about what a lady should and should not do. I was expected to smile softly, play quietly, and sit with my knees together, as if freedom could escape through the gaps. But I was also born with a dangerous thing, a mind that asked why, and worse, a mother who read novels. At first, I wanted to be a nun, truly. I thought it would mean peace, order, and long hours of contemplation. You see the irony, don't you? My first fantasy of freedom was a convent. That dream didn't last long. By the time I turned 10, I was already scribbling in secret notebooks and telling my little sister that God was probably just a metaphor invented by people afraid of thunder. Needless to say, my parents were thrilled. At school, I was always the girl with ink-stained fingers and too many questions. I remember one teacher, very proper, very patient, who told me, "Simone, young ladies don't argue like that." To which I replied, "Then I suppose I'll have to become something else." The thing is, I knew early on that being a girl came with instructions, softness, sweetness, silence, and above all, don't make anyone uncomfortable, especially not the boys. But I also knew I couldn't fit into that costume without cutting off a piece of myself. That's when I started observing people, rules, hypocrisies. I watched how my father praised my intelligence, but only up to a point. How my mother encouraged curiosity, but not rebellion. How other girls were rewarded for being pretty, not brilliant. And here's the part no one tells you. Once you see the structure, you can't unsee it. It's like realizing the play you're in has been cast without your consent. Even today, girls are still given scripts. Only now, the lines come from Instagram captions and TikTok trends. Be authentic, they say, while filtering every image. Be confident, they say, but not too loud. Be yourself, they whisper, as long as yourself fits the algorithm. It's not so different from the 1920s, really. The technology changed, the expectations didn't. I remember once, during a family gathering, a relative looked at me, serious, grave, and said, "Simone, you'll make a lovely wife one day." I was 10. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "That sounds like a waste of a brain." Now don't get me wrong. I have nothing against love or marriage or making someone soup when they're sick. What I object to is the idea that my value should be measured by someone else's comfort. From a very young age, I felt torn between two worlds, the one that wanted me to behave and the one that dared me to become. So I read. I read like a thief in the night, stealing knowledge wherever I could find it. Balzac, Stendhal, Dostoevsky. I didn't always understand them, but I inhaled their worlds like they were maps to a future where I might exist fully. I kept diaries, dozens of them. I still do. Somewhere, buried in a box, is a page from when I was 12. I wrote, "One day I will be free, even if I have to invent what that means." I didn't know then that freedom would cost so much, that it would mean loneliness, doubt, rejection, and 1,000 little deaths. But I also didn't know how alive it would make me feel. And you? Do you remember the moment you realized you were playing a role? That first time you looked in the mirror and thought, "Who am I performing for?" Maybe it was at school, or in a family photo, or during a job interview, when you heard yourself saying things you didn't believe, just to seem acceptable. If you haven't had that moment yet, you will. And when it comes, I hope you meet it with kindness, not shame, because the first step toward freedom is not defiance, it's honesty. So here I am, Simone, once a little girl in a too-tight dress, now an old woman in a loose nightgown, sipping cold tea and whispering through time. And you, still awake? Good, because now that you know where I came from, I can tell you how I began to fight back, not with fists, with thoughts, with pages, with a pact, the strangest, most intimate, most impossible pact of my life. But I'll save that for the next part. Breathe a little. Stretch your legs. Maurice just changed positions and knocked over my bookmark. Typical. Next, I'll tell you about philosophy in a pleated skirt, and the boy with bulging eyes who dared to argue with me and never stopped. I was barely 20 when I passed the agrégation in philosophy, second in all of France, the only woman in my year to even try. First was Sartre, of course. I'll get to him. Don't worry, you'll get more Sartre than you bargained for. But let's not rush. Philosophy, for me, was never an escape. It was a scalpel, a way to cut through appearances, to slice into the heart of what people said they believed. I didn't study to impress. I studied to survive. Because I knew early on, if I couldn't dismantle the world, it would dismantle me. I remember walking into those classrooms full of men in gray coats and tobacco-stained fingers. They looked at me the way one might look at a piano in the middle of a boxing ring, out of place, amusing, irrelevant. But I wasn't there to play sonatas. I was there to take notes, sharpen arguments, cut through their certainties like a knife through warm butter. I wore pleated skirts, yes. I had long, dark hair. I laughed when appropriate, but inside, I was all fire and steel. I knew what they thought of me, bright but temporary, a clever girl, a phase, the kind they expect to get married and stop thinking. I had other plans. And then Sartre. Ah, Sartre. Picture a small man with round glasses and the unblinking eyes of someone who never learned how to look away. We met in class. We argued on day 1. He said, "Freedom is anguish." I said, "Anguish is what women are handed at birth." He blinked. I smirked. We were hooked. He wasn't like the others. He didn't patronize me. He didn't flirt. He debated, relentlessly, fiercely. He made me feel, how do I put this, like a brain, not a possibility. He saw me as a mind worth wrestling with. We studied together day and night. The cafes, the libraries, the benches of the Jardin du Luxembourg. We argued about Heidegger, laughed about Descartes, made fun of the rigid professors who still believed knowledge was a straight line. It never is. It's a spiral, a chaos, a trembling of doubt. One afternoon, over a lukewarm coffee and a pile of books, Sartre looked at me and said, "You know, we're going to be necessary to each other." I raised an eyebrow. "Not exclusive," he added, "but necessary." That was the beginning of the pact. No marriage, no lies, no ownership. Total honesty, shared ideas, separate lives. A love of the mind first. Everything else negotiable. At the time, it felt revolutionary, radical. Two minds walking side by side without chains. Today, I suppose it would be called an open relationship. Back then, it was a storm with no map, but we'll get to that. What mattered was this. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to shrink. I didn't feel like an exception. I felt like a philosopher. Still, it wasn't easy. Walking into those cafes, hand in hand with Sartre, I could feel the stares. Some men respected me in private, then ignored me in public. I was a woman who refused to play muse, which made me inconvenient. You see, people don't mind intelligent women as long as they stay in the margins. The moment you write, publish, speak, the moment you say, "I think," with full voice, they flinch, because it means you exist outside their gaze. That's when I realized freedom isn't just internal, it's relational. It only begins when someone sees you as a subject, not a function. Sartre and I talked about that constantly, about how the gaze of the other shapes the self, about how we become who we are through tension, struggle, recognition. We quoted Hegel, laughed about being and nothingness, smoked too many cigarettes, and forgot to eat. We were poor. We were hungry. We were so very alive. And you? Have you ever had that moment? That rare spark where someone sees your mind, not your body, not your usefulness, not your charm, just the sharp, shimmering shape of your thought? If you have, hold on to it. If you haven't, don't settle until you do. That's the gift of philosophy. Not answers, but better questions. The kind that keep you up at night and pull you closer to yourself. Even now, lying in bed, mask on my forehead, cat on my legs, I remember those first years like fire. I was Simone, not Miss de Beauvoir, not the daughter of so-and-so, just Simone, sharp as a blade, soft as a question, hungry for meaning. And I knew that to live freely, I had to think dangerously. But thinking is only half the battle. The real trouble comes when you try to live it. And that's what came next. Our pact, our freedoms, our failures, our beautiful, impossible truth. But I'll tell you that in a moment. Right now, I need to... Wait, Maurice just knocked over my notebook again. I think he's trying to edit my past. Little rascal. Anyway, close your eyes if you can. Breathe deep and get ready. Because next, I'll tell you what it really meant to love Sartre, without possession, without lies, without a single drawer in common. Still awake? I should have known. You're the curious type, the kind who doesn't fall asleep when a story gets complicated, only when it gets safe. Let's talk about the pact. Sartre and I had decided early on that love would not be a prison. No marriage, no kids, no shared bank accounts, no tiny toothbrushes lined up next to each other in a white-tiled bathroom. Just this, truth. Radical, unfiltered, often uncomfortable truth. We would be necessary to each other, but never exclusive. We would be loyal in thought, if not in geography. We would tell each other everything, every encounter, every letter, every desire. Yes, that was the deal. I can hear you blinking from here. You're wondering if it worked, if it was liberating or devastating, if it was brave or foolish. The answer is yes, to all of it. At first, it was exhilarating. We wrote to each other constantly. Even when we were in the same city, we'd send letters, pages upon pages, like two philosophers documenting their own myth in real time. His handwriting was awful. Mine was meticulous. That should have been a clue. Sartre was a storm of ideas. I was the notebook trying to keep up. And when we were apart, he told me about the women he met, students, actresses, travelers, and I told him about the men who flirted with me on trains, and the women I loved in silence. Yes, women too, but more on that later. You see, when you try to live outside the rules, you don't escape the pain. You just choose a different flavor of it. Sartre and I didn't lie. That was the rule. But truth is not always kind. There were nights when I read his letters and felt my stomach fold into itself. When I smiled with my lips and broke with my ribs. When I wondered if the pact was just a beautiful excuse to avoid being needed. One time, he wrote to me from a cafe in Marseille. He had met a girl named Olga. "She's brilliant," he said. "Reminds me a bit of you, but less guarded." I laughed. And then I went to the bathroom and vomited. But I stayed. Not out of weakness, out of belief. I believed in our freedom. I believed love could exist without control. I still do. You see, most people confuse love with possession. They say mine and mean safe. They say forever and mean trapped. But I didn't want to own Sartre. I wanted to know him moment by moment in the raw absurdity of being alive. Was it perfect? Holy olive pit? No. Was it honest? Almost always. Was it worth it? Yes. Because alongside the pain, there was something else, a vastness, a space where I could be fully myself, contradictory, curious, changeable, a place where no one expected me to choose between being a woman and being a mind. And that is rare. I've seen so many people today trying to reinvent love, polyamory, conscious uncoupling, relationship anarchy. All these modern phrases dancing around the same ancient longing, to love without losing yourself. But it's hard, isn't it? Even today, in your century of emojis and situationships, we still want to be the favorite, the chosen one. We want security dressed up as passion. We want freedom, but only if no one else touches them. That's not freedom. That's a velvet cage. Our pact was a different kind of cage, one we designed ourselves, door wide open, and still we stayed. But here's the thing no one likes to admit. Even open doors can feel like walls when you're lonely. There were days when I wished Sartre would just come home and hold me without a new name on his lips. Nights when I wrote essays with tears in the margins. Mornings when I told myself, this is the price of being unowned. This is the cost of choosing yourself. And maybe that's true. Maybe every kind of love demands a kind of grief. But here's what no one could take from us: the mind, the connection, the way our thoughts danced together like smoke in a cafe, the way we sharpened each other like knives in a drawer too small. He made me better. I made him clearer. And when we fought, it wasn't about jealousy. It was about philosophy, about whether existence precedes essence, about whether ethics can survive freedom, about whether Camus was right. He was. Don't tell Sartre. And when we loved, it was like breathing fire. Nothing pretty, nothing easy, but real. So, was it worth it? I think so. I lived what I believed. And when the world told me I was too much, too serious, too sharp, too free, Sartre never asked me to be less. He simply said, "Write it down." And I did. And now here I am, with cold tea, an old cat, and a lifetime of contradictions, telling you about a love that refused to wear a ring, not because it was afraid, but because it had other things to hold. Close your eyes if you're not already drifting. Next, I'll tell you about the first time I realized I had to write, not just for Sartre, not even for myself, but for every woman who had ever swallowed her thoughts like bitter pills and smiled anyway. Let me tell you now about the moment I understood I had to write, not just to express myself, but to survive myself. After our pact was in place, and after the first flares of intellectual romance had settled into a steady flame, I found myself alone more often than I expected. Sartre traveled. He wrote. He lived surrounded by his students, admirers, the chaos he fed on. And I stayed behind, in cafes, in rented rooms, in corners of borrowed silence. There was a point where I could feel myself beginning to dissolve. You don't need chains to disappear. Sometimes it's enough to be consistently overlooked, or misread, or called brilliant for a woman. That's when I began to write with desperation, not for recognition, not even for clarity. I wrote to anchor myself, to insist, sentence after sentence, that I existed, and not as a muse, a girlfriend, a note in the margins of someone else's genius, but as a voice. At first, I didn't believe in it. I'd write a page, read it, and whisper, "Who do you think you are?" That's the voice most women grow up with. Not loud, not cruel, just constant. And yet, something in me pushed forward. I started with novels and essays, and then slowly, cautiously, I began to write about the thing I was most afraid to touch, being a woman. It's strange how you can spend your whole life inside something, a body, a role, a silence, and still not name it, still not look at it straight on. I had been living that experience every day, being watched, judged, expected, shaped. But until I wrote it, I didn't know how deep it went. The first time I tried to describe it, I was sitting in a small apartment, one chair, one typewriter, no heating, and a headache that felt like God knocking on the inside of my skull. I was drinking the worst instant coffee you can imagine, and I wrote the words, "The body of woman is a situation, not a curse, not a gift, a situation." That sentence terrified me. And that's how I knew it mattered. People often ask me, "Why did you write The Second Sex?" And I say, because I couldn't breathe inside the first one. The world didn't want me to write that book. Oh, it was fine with me publishing fiction, polite philosophy, thoughtful reflections on ethics. But the moment I said, "This is what it's like to live as a woman," the knives came out. Letters poured in, anonymous insults, public ridicule. I was called bitter, hysterical, perverse. They said I hated men, that I was jealous, that I was dangerous. But do you know what stayed with me? The letters from women, from mothers, students, factory workers, from women who had never read Sartre or Kant or Hegel, but who read me and said, "That's it. That's what I feel and never had the words for." Those letters were my oxygen, because for every man who called me arrogant, there was a woman who whispered, "Thank you." And here's what I learned. When you start telling the truth about your own life, the world will try to punish you. But it can't unwrite what's been written. That's the thing about language. Once spoken, it lives. It travels. It finds the next girl hiding in a quiet corner, doubting herself, and says, "You're not crazy. You're not alone." So I wrote. I wrote like a woman trying to outrun erasure. I wrote in train stations, in smoky bars, in rented rooms with terrible wallpaper. I wrote when I was tired, when I was furious, when I felt nothing at all. And slowly, the silence inside me began to thin, not vanish, just become porous. That's the real power of writing. It doesn't fix you. It doesn't save you. But it makes the void a little more livable, a little more yours. Even now, I keep notebooks everywhere, on my bedside table, in the kitchen. Sometimes I scribble things I'll never publish, dreams, fragments, sentences without endings, because it reminds me I'm still here, still thinking, still resisting the urge to vanish. And you? Have you ever written something and surprised yourself? Have you ever said, "I didn't know I thought that until the words came out"? That's the door. That's the crack. That's where your voice begins. So no, I didn't write The Second Sex because I wanted to become famous. Frankly, fame is exhausting. I wrote it because I couldn't breathe under the weight of silence, because I needed to say, "This is what it feels like." And because I knew, deep down, that someone, somewhere, needed to hear it. Maybe even you. Now then, you still awake? Next, I'll tell you what happened when that book hit the world like a match on dry paper. I'll tell you what it's like to be loved and hated in the same breath, to be quoted, misquoted, misunderstood, and to survive it. And yes, I'll tell you what they shouted at me in the street. But first, I need another tea. Maurice just knocked the old one over. Again. Still with me? That's impressive. Most people flee when the word feminism appears. Or worse, they nod politely and scroll away. But you stayed. So let's talk about the book. Yes, that book. Le Deuxième Sexe, The Second Sex, The Doorstop, The Scandal, The Thick, Unforgivable Mirror. I didn't plan for it to be a bomb. I meant it to be a map, or maybe a flashlight, a way to trace all the invisible walls I'd been walking into my whole life. But when you name the walls, people start screaming, especially the ones who built them. I remember sitting at my desk, chain smoking, surrounded by piles of notes and philosophical tombstones, Hegel, Marx, Freud, Husserl. All those bearded minds trying to explain woman without ever having been one. I was tired of it. I didn't want another theory. I wanted the truth. Lived, breathed, bitter. So I wrote. I wrote everything. The biology, the history, the psychology. I wrote about menstruation and maternity, about corsets and housework, about desire and disgust. I wrote the things women whispered to each other at night and pretended not to feel in daylight. It was exhausting, not intellectually, existentially, because with every sentence, I felt myself peeling away another layer of conditioning, my own and everyone else's. And when I finished, when I typed that last page, hands trembling, throat dry, I knew something had shifted, not just in me, in the world. The book came out in 1949, and let me tell you, the world was not ready. The backlash was immediate and creative. An obscenity, a threat to morality, a female Marxist Freud with lipstick and no children. One critic said I needed a good man and a long vacation. Another suggested my uterus was angry. Yes, my uterus. People shouted at me in the street. Priests denounced me from pulpits. Old classmates avoided eye contact. Strangers sent hate mail composed entirely of Bible verses and grammatical errors. But then, something else happened. Letters. So many letters. From women who had never dared speak aloud what they felt in the kitchen, in the bedroom, in their own heads. From girls who read The Second Sex under the covers with a flashlight. From mothers who said, "You gave me words I didn't know I was allowed to have." And that made it worth everything. Because here's the secret. I didn't write that book against men. I wrote it for women. Not as a weapon, but as a mirror. Not to shame anyone, but to finally stop the silence. People accused me of being bitter. Of course I was. Wouldn't you be after centuries of being defined by absence? They said I was trying to start a war between the sexes. Number. I was just trying to end the occupation. But do you know what hurt the most? The women who hated me. Women who had internalized the lies so deeply, they believed freedom was dangerous, that obedience was grace, that speaking out was betrayal. They wrote to me too. You're ruining everything. You make us look like victims. Just be grateful. Things aren't that bad. But things were bad. They were just normal. And people mistake normal for good all the time. I wasn't asking for pity. I was demanding awareness. Because once you see the structure, you can't unsee it. And once you name it, you can start to change it. Today, I see the second sex quoted in Instagram bios and college syllabi. I see one is not born, but rather becomes a woman tattooed on ribs and scribbled in journals. It's beautiful and a little absurd. I once saw a mug with that quote next to a picture of pink high heels. I thought, oh, Simone, you've become merch. But then I smiled, because I'd rather be a quote on a mug than a silence in someone's chest. And you? Have you ever said something out loud that made people uncomfortable, even people you love? Have you ever spoken your truth and felt the room go cold? It hurts. But it means you're alive. It means you've stopped pretending. So yes, the second sex changed everything. It made me enemies. It made me infamous. It made me real. And I've learned to live with the contradiction, to be hated and helpful, dismissed and unforgettable. That's the price of truth in a world built on convenience. You still there? Good. Because next, I want to talk about something even more uncomfortable. The way women are taught to disappear while smiling. The way we learn to dress our silence in perfume and politeness. Next, I'll show you how bad faith isn't just a philosophical concept. It's an everyday outfit, and most of us don't even know we're wearing it. Let me tell you about bad faith. Not the dramatic kind, not betrayal or lies in candlelit rooms. No. I mean the quiet kind, the subtle kind, the kind that lives in your morning routine and whispers in your choice of shoes. In philosophy, bad faith means pretending something is necessary when it isn't, lying to yourself to avoid the burden of choice. It's Sartre's idea, but I saw it everywhere. especially in women. Let me explain. There's a moment, and maybe you felt it, when you're doing something because that's just how it is, even though a tiny voice inside you wants something else. Wearing makeup because it's expected. Smiling when you want to scream. Saying it's fine when it absolutely isn't. Pretending not to be angry because you're afraid of being called difficult. That's bad faith. That's the performance of being agreeable at the expense of being real. It's not your fault. Most of us are trained into it. I was too. I remember once, early in my teaching career, I spent almost an hour in front of a mirror trying to apply eyeliner from a magazine tutorial titled Eyes That Say Yes. I was going to give a lecture on Spinoza. But there I was, holding a tiny pencil to my eyelid, trying to make my gaze less threatening. That's the absurdity of being a woman in bad faith. Even your pupils must be polite. And the worst part? No one asked me to do that. That's what makes it bad faith. It's internalized. You do it to yourself, willingly, lovingly, relentlessly. It's like decorating your own cage. But let's not pretend this is only a woman's burden. Men too carry scripts, silent ones, the pressure to be strong, to be unshakable, to succeed, to never cry in front of anyone, to be charming, confident, uninterested in fear. Bad faith doesn't wear lipstick, always. Sometimes it wears a suit and never asks for help. I see it everywhere now, in influencers preaching authenticity while selling contour palettes, in men congratulated for being stoic when really they're just numb, in girl boss slogans that repackage burnout as ambition, and in alpha male podcasts doing exactly the same. I'm not judging. Truly, I understand. The system is seductive. It tells you you'll be loved if you play along, that you'll be safe if you're desirable, or in control, or efficient, or endlessly resilient. But none of that is freedom. That's performance. I've seen women perform their lives like stage plays with no intermission. Good daughter, sweet girlfriend, productive employee, supportive wife, cool mom, gracious aging woman. And inside, a stranger, waiting, wondering when she gets to be real. And I've seen men so deep in their role they forgot they were acting. Providers, heroes, jokers, rocks, even when they're crumbling inside. The tragedy of bad faith is that it feels like safety. It feels like order. But it's just quiet desperation dressed in compliance. So what do? We notice it. We name it. That's always the first step. Not revolution. Recognition. The next time you find yourself doing something because that's what people expect, stop and ask, do I believe in this? Do I want this? Or am I just afraid of being unloved? Sometimes the answer is painful. Sometimes it's embarrassing. Sometimes you realize you've been lying to yourself for years. That's okay. Freedom isn't about always being right. It's about being honest. And honesty is messy, unpopular, often lonely. I lost friends when I started writing about women. Not enemies, friends. Women who said I was too negative, too bold, too ungrateful. One said, "Simone, you're making it harder for the rest of us." As if naming the fire is what burns the house down. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Because I knew that under every polished surface was a story aching to be told. And if I didn't write them, who would? Even now, I look around and see the same patterns repeating. Be strong, they say, but not so strong you're intimidating. Be independent, but don't forget to smile. Be free, but only if it fits the brand. Sometimes I wonder what freedom would feel like without all the packaging, without the labels, without the likes. Maybe it's just silence, real silence, not the kind that hides pain, but the kind that waits for truth to rise. Or maybe it's a breath, a decision, a pair of pants you chose because you like them, not because they flatter your figure. You'd be amazed how many revolutions begin with trousers. So here's your homework. No grades, I promise. Just a small question to carry with you. Where in your life are you still performing? Not in a grand way, in the quiet corners, in your apologies, in your laughter, in your closet, in your silences. Ask, listen, don't judge. That's where freedom starts, not with fire, but with a question. You still awake? Next, I'll tell you about the women who fought against me, not men, but sisters, and how I learned that sometimes the fiercest resistance to change comes not from above, but from within. Still awake? You brave soul. I thought I'd lost you somewhere between the cold tea and the existential spiral. But no, here you are, still listening, still thinking. Let's dig into something a little more uncomfortable. Let me tell you a secret. The most vicious letters I ever received after The Second Sex was published weren't from men. Not all of them, at least. Some of the worst came from women, teachers, housewives, even fellow writers, women who thought I was dangerous, not because I lied, but because I dared to say what they had spent their whole lives trying not to hear. They called me immoral, irresponsible, a bad influence on our daughters. One of them, I remember clearly, accused me of emasculating France. I didn't even know France had a gender you could threaten with a pen. It hurt, not because they disagreed, but because I understood. That's what's most painful about betrayal. It only works when it comes from people who could have been your allies, sisters, comrades, friends. Women who, like me, were told from birth to sit down, be good, be pretty, be quiet, and somehow chose to defend the voice of the rulebook instead of their own. I see it today too. Have you noticed? There are women, loud, confident, certain, who spend their time mocking feminism, who post clips of Andrew Tate with captions like, "Finally, a real man," who explain on podcasts that women are just too emotional for leadership, who say we had it better before we had rights. Holy olive pit, what happened to nuance? I call them patriarchy's unpaid interns. And yes, I see you smiling. That was a bit harsh, but only a bit. Sometimes it's not even their fault. That's the trick with systems of power. They don't just live outside us. They crawl inside. They teach us to love our chains, to call them tradition, to call obedience wisdom, to call silence grace. I'm not angry at these women. I've been one of them. We all have. That's what I mean when I talk about bad faith, la mauvaise foi, the quiet little theater we perform inside ourselves, where we pretend not to see, not to know, not to feel the friction between who we are and who we've been told to be. I remember one afternoon, I spent hours trying to follow a makeup tutorial I found in Elle magazine. I smeared, powdered, curled my lashes until my eyes stung. Then I looked in the mirror and thought, this isn't me. But maybe it's the version of me that will be tolerated, that will be praised, that will be left alone. It didn't last. My skin revolted, and so did I. Let me be clear, there's nothing wrong with lipstick, or high heels, or homemaking. But if you're doing it just so someone else doesn't leave you, that's not choice. That's negotiation with your jailer, and some jailers look a lot like friends. If you're still here, dear listener, and this is resonating, you know the drill. Like, subscribe. It's not compulsory, but it is feminist. I'll say something that might sting a little. There are women who hate women more than the misogynists themselves. I don't say it to divide. I say it to wake us up, to remind us that internalized oppression is sneaky, that just because the voice sounds familiar doesn't mean it's your own. So if someone tells you that fighting for your freedom is selfish or dramatic or a phase, pause. Look at where that voice is coming from, and then, instead of arguing, offer them tea. Cold, bitter, liberating tea. Because the truth is, we won't change everything overnight, but we can start by refusing to be foot soldiers for our own suppression. We can choose another role, and that's exactly what I did, even when I was scared, even when I was ridiculed, even when the people I thought were my sisters told me I was a traitor. I didn't stop, because I knew, in the deepest part of me, no one is truly free until we all are. Anyway, enough about sisters who act like saboteurs. Let's talk about something more stable, or rather, the absence of it. My bags, my notebooks, my endless hotel check-ins, my quiet panic when the desk was too wobbly to write, or the light too yellow, or the silence too loud. Freedom, they said. But freedom without a table? That's just floating. So come with me now, through train stations, cafes, and borrowed rooms, as we chase what everyone seems to want these days, a life in motion. Let's find out if it's all it's cracked up to be. You know what they say now? Home is where the Wi-Fi connects automatically. How poetic. How tragic. I've lived out of a suitcase more times than I can count. Hotels with floral wallpaper. Rented rooms that smelled like someone else's life. Guest beds where the pillow was either too soft or suspiciously wet. There was a time when I could unpack my entire life in under 10 minutes. Books, notebooks, a bottle of aspirin, 3 pens, and one tiny tin of tea that always tasted like dust and ambition. People told me I was lucky. You're so free, Simone. You can go anywhere. As if movement was the same as freedom. As if the absence of roots made you lighter instead of lonelier. I remember one afternoon in Rome. My room overlooked a courtyard filled with orange trees. It was beautiful, in theory. In reality, I had no chair, no desk. I wrote hunched over the minibar, sitting on my suitcase. I spilled wine on my manuscript and cried, not because of the stains, but because I couldn't tell if it was worth finishing anymore. Still awake? Oh dear. I was hoping you'd be snoring by now. But since you're not, let's go deeper. There's something seductive about constant motion. It gives the illusion of progress. You never have to stay still long enough to face the silence. You don't have to answer the question that haunts every thinking person late at night. Why am I doing any of this? We don't talk enough about how exhausting it is to always be on the move. How your body becomes a transport device for your thoughts. How you start to forget what day it is, or where you put your soul. I used to envy people with routines, coffee in the same cup, desk by the same window, a neighbor who waved at them like they mattered. But I also feared it. That comfort might dull the edge of my thinking, that staying still might mean growing soft. And so I chose movement, like a snail without its shell, which I'll admit is a terrible metaphor. Snails aren't known for their speed or their radical feminism. Today, everyone seems to be chasing this lifestyle: remote work, digital nomads, van life, the dream of being everywhere and nowhere. But do you know what I see? The same loneliness, the same search for meaning, the same desperate need for Wi-Fi and purpose. There's a paradox in this. The more we move, the more we crave a place to return to, not just physically, but philosophically. A room of one's own, yes, but also a time of one's own. A rhythm that isn't dictated by airports, pings, and productivity. I used to write in cafes because it made me feel less alone. Surrounded by clinking cups and strangers' conversations, I could pretend the world was humming in harmony. But then someone would look at me, just a little too long, and I'd remember. To many, I was just a woman scribbling nonsense, a curiosity, a body first, a mind second, if that. By the way, if you've ever felt like a wandering soul with too many tabs open, maybe this is a good time to like and subscribe. Even nomads need a lighthouse. So many of us have mistaken motion for meaning. But you don't have to live out of a suitcase to feel unrooted. You can be in your childhood bedroom and still feel like a guest in your own life. You can be surrounded by friends and still feel like no one sees you. You can have a house and not feel at home. Here's what I learned. Real freedom isn't about going everywhere. It's about having a space where you can stop pretending. A space where your thoughts can take their shoes off. Where your body isn't being watched. Where you can be, not perform. I never quite found that place. Not perfectly, but sometimes, late at night, in a rented room, with Maurice purring beside me and my hand aching from too much writing, I came close. Tonight, maybe you're in your bed, or maybe on a couch that isn't really yours. Maybe the walls feel unfamiliar. Maybe your dreams feel borrowed. That's okay. Don't rush to fill the emptiness. Let it echo a bit. Sometimes, that's where the truest thoughts begin. Because a table, a chair, a quiet lamp, they're not just furniture. They're a revolution, a declaration. I exist, and I need space. So before we move again, before we chase the next train or trend, let's sit still for a moment. Breathe. Make this room yours, even just for tonight. And when you're ready, we'll talk about something harder. Desire, shame, and the power of touching a hand when touching was forbidden. Ready? Then stay where you are. I'll come to you. Still not asleep? My goodness. I was hoping you'd be snoring by now, ideally with a little bit of drool on your pillow. But if you're still here, let's open a forbidden drawer together. Let's talk about desire. No, not the filtered, polished kind you see in perfume ads. Not the version sold in Valentine's Day aisles. I mean the raw, aching kind. The one that shows up uninvited, barefoot, and unapologetic. The kind you're not supposed to admit out loud, especially if you're a woman, or sensitive, or anything that doesn't fit neatly in a spreadsheet. Desire has always made people uncomfortable, especially when it doesn't follow the rules. Mine didn't, often. I was supposed to be the clever one, the rational one, the philosopher with tidy notebooks and a sharp tongue. But let me confess something, since we're whispering in the dark. I've loved in all the wrong ways, unexpectedly, improperly, and sometimes fiercely, and sometimes invisibly. You see, my body was never just mine. It was always being watched, assessed, framed as a symbol of sin or rebellion or contradiction. But deep down, it was just a body that wanted, and that, apparently, was dangerous enough. One summer, I still remember the smell of warm bread and sea salt. I sat on a terrace with someone who saw through me, not in a scary way, in a kind way. Our fingers touched, barely. Just enough to say, you exist. I see you. It was nothing, and it was everything. That's the secret no one tells you. Sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't shouting in the street. It's reaching out, quietly, in full awareness of your own desire, without shame, because shame is the oldest costume. We learn to wear it early, especially if we're told our wants are too much, or not respectable, or simply inconvenient. I was told all of that, and I still wrote. I still loved. I still kissed people I wasn't supposed to. And I still came back to my desk with trembling hands and a very straight spine. And yes, in case you're wondering, they called me immoral, a corrupter of youth, which is frankly flattering. I barely had time to corrupt my own laundry schedule. But what they really couldn't stand was this, that I spoke of love without blushing, that I named the things that made my heart gallop, that I wrote as if my body mattered. Still with me? Then let me ask you this, quietly, gently. When was the last time you said yes to a feeling, without running it through 1,000 filters first? Even today, in a world that claims to be liberated, desire still frightens people, especially when it's soft, or messy, or doesn't serve a product. We scroll, we swipe, we ghost. We learn to perform closeness without ever truly undressing, emotionally, I mean, and we wonder why we feel alone. Desire, real, honest, inconvenient desire, is not the problem. Lying about it is. By the way, if you've made it this far into this strange little confession and your tea is now cold, like mine, maybe click like, or subscribe. Even philosophers need a little love in the algorithm. So tonight, if you've buried your longings under layers of I shouldn't, maybe just let them stretch a little. Yawn, breathe. Remember they're yours, not rented, not borrowed, yours. And now that we've opened that secret drawer, let's open the window, because desire is one thing, but being seen, that's another kind of fire. And it's time we talked about that. Let's talk about being watched, not in the spooky, there's a camera in my toaster way, in the everyday way, the subtle way, the way that starts so early you don't even notice it. I was watched before I understood what watching meant, in classrooms, in family dinners, on sidewalks, in the margins of philosophy conferences. People looked at me and saw something else, a woman in philosophy, not just a philosopher, not just a mind. They saw the curve of my voice, the cut of my skirt, the impression I left behind as I walked away. And before I could define myself, I was already being defined. You too? We live in a world that teaches us to perform, to smile when we'd rather scream, to soften our words, to pose for the invisible lens we imagine behind every glance. We learn how to angle our faces, adjust our tones, wear outfits that say, I belong, I'm harmless, I'm good. But here's the trick no one warns you about. The more you learn to be seen, the harder it becomes to see yourself. That's why mirrors scare me more than critics. A mirror asks, who are you when no one's watching? And that question, it stings. I've played many roles, writer, lover, daughter, revolutionary, public enemy number 12. Some of them I chose, others I inherited. But the hardest part was never acting. The hardest part was knowing whether the applause was meant for me or for the costume. Today, we carry cameras in our pockets. We curate our own image with filters and frames. But deep down, the hunger is the same. Do you see me? Do I count? Do I matter if I stop smiling? And that's the real question, isn't it? Are you living to be looked at or to look within? Sometimes, when I passed by a bookstore and saw my name in the window, I'd freeze. Not with pride, with doubt. That Simone, the confident thinker in print, wasn't always the same woman who stared at the ceiling at 2 a.m., wondering if her latest draft was garbage. I've come to believe that being truly seen is terrifying, not because it's invasive, but because it's rare. It requires stillness, honesty, silence, the kind of silence that feels like a spotlight and a hug at the same time. And when someone really does see you, without projection, without agenda, it's not glamorous. It's tender, vulnerable, almost too much. But that's also where the magic happens. That's where you begin. So tonight, if you've been adjusting your posture for an invisible audience, if you've been clapping for your own performance just to fill the void, I invite you to do something radical. Close your eyes, not to disappear, but to return. See if, behind all the gestures and angles and reflexes, there's a you who's been quietly waiting to be seen, not through eyes, but through presence. And don't worry, you don't have to post about it. Just feel it. Still not sleepy? Me neither. Maurice is, of course. He just yawned in judgment. But let's give him a break. He's never had to worry about how he looks in a philosophy department. Now, I want to take you somewhere softer, a place I visited often, a territory that kept me company on every sleepless night, a place that men have always seemed to conquer with ease. It's time we talked about sleep, not the act, but the privilege. Still here? Goodness. I was sure that last paragraph would do the trick. Either you're more resistant to sleep than I am, or you're just too polite to leave me mid-thought. In both cases, I'm touched. Now, let's drift even deeper. Let me tell you something unfair. Sartre could fall asleep in 7 minutes. I timed him once. 7. While I was in the next room rewriting a sentence for the 13th time, wondering whether transcendental sounded too pompous. He could nap on trains, in lecture halls, even after a heated debate. He'd close his eyes and trust the world to keep spinning. Me? I couldn't even trust my brain to stop listing regrets from 1942. And I started to notice something. Most of the men I knew slept like bricks, or gods, or small, smug clouds. Meanwhile, the women, writers, thinkers, mothers, waitresses, teachers, stayed up, planning, remembering, doubting, anticipating tomorrow's chaos with military precision. Sleep, it turns out, isn't just biological, it's cultural. The world has always expected women to stay alert, emotionally, logistically, socially. Don't forget your keys. Don't walk alone. Don't raise your voice. Don't be too much. And definitely, don't let anything fall through the cracks, even if that means sacrificing your rest, your peace, your breath. At some point, I realized that sleep itself had become a luxury, a male-coded one, like silence, or solitude, or a room of one's own. Sometimes, in hotel rooms far from Paris, I'd lie awake listening to the hum of a minibar, the shuffle of streetlights outside, and I'd envy the people who could surrender. Let go. Fall. I tried herbal teas, heavy curtains, chamomile baths. Nothing worked, because my brain wasn't tired. It was vigilant, like a lighthouse, always scanning. I've read studies, modern ones, about the mental load women carry, how they're often the project managers of life, remembering birthdays, groceries, emotional dynamics, doctor's appointments. That list doesn't stop just because the lights are off. In fact, it gets louder. That's when the real audit begins. Did I forget to respond to that message? Should I have spoken up at dinner? Was I too emotional? Not enough? Did I take up too much space? Or vanish again? The pillow becomes a stage, and every thought a rehearsal. Now, of course, not everyone experiences this the same way. Some men lie awake too. Guilt, shame, ambition, loneliness, they don't discriminate. But history has a rhythm, and some of us were trained to stay awake, just in case. Tonight, if you're tossing and turning, I won't offer advice, just solidarity. Know this, you're not weak for being tired. You're not broken for being wired. You're not alone in your insomnia. Sometimes being awake is a form of care. Sometimes it's a quiet rebellion. And sometimes it's just insomnia, that annoying, useless, poetic little beast. Maurice, of course, is snoring again. He has no existential burden, no inbox, no gender politics, just whiskers and dreams of moths. As for me, I'll keep speaking until your thoughts slow down enough to whisper back, okay, just 5 minutes, maybe 10. And when they do, let them take you. But if you're still with me, if your eyes are heavy but your mind isn't, I have something else to share. A game of sorts. Let's look around the room. My room. It's cluttered, cozy, familiar. But every object has a story. And tonight, I'd like to tell you what they say when the lights are low and everyone else is dreaming. Ready? Then stay right here, because the books are about to speak. Let me describe the battlefield, my room, or should I say, my archive, my confessional, my laboratory of thought, my cozy chaos. It's not Instagram friendly. There are no minimalist beige tones, no eucalyptus branches in a ceramic vase. My bed isn't made. The teacup on my nightstand is chipped. The books are stacked sideways, vertically, sometimes diagonally. It's less curated than it is, accumulated. But every object in here holds a piece of me. That old desk by the window. I wrote my first published article there, while watching the neighbor's laundry flap like revolution flags. The drawers squeak when they're opened, as if protesting the weight of unfinished drafts. I once found a withered rose between 2 notebooks. I don't remember who gave it to me. Maybe it was me. There's a lamp shaped like an owl. Sartre gave it to me as a joke. To watch over your nocturnal philosophy, he said. The owl has one eye slightly askew. I like to think it's winking. Near my bed, there's a little framed quote, not mine. It says, "Think against yourself," a motto I try to live by, though sometimes it turns into overthink against yourself, which isn't quite as noble. Then there's the pile of letters tied with a faded ribbon, some from friends, some from lovers, some from women I've never met, who read Le Deuxième Sexe and wrote to say, "You said what I didn't know how to say." Those letters, they're my medals, my bruises, my reminders that words can reach across time zones and shame. There's also a single red shoe. Don't ask about the other. I wore them once to a debate in Berlin. My heel broke mid-sentence. I kept speaking, kept limping toward the end of my point like a wounded soldier of syntax. You see, people imagine philosophers live in abstraction, but really, we live among crumbs, crumpled paper, mismatched socks, and broken pens. Thought is messy, and truth is rarely filed alphabetically. Look around your own space. Go ahead, even if it's dark. even if you're in bed? What surrounds you? A mug you forgot to rinse? A book you meant to finish last summer? A charger tangled like your thoughts? These objects, however trivial, carry traces. They remember. They testify. Instagram homes are beautiful lies. They erase the labor of living, the dust, the smudges, the books that betrayed you, the shirts you cried into, the lamp that buzzes slightly when no one's listening. My space is full of ghosts, of younger versions of me, of fears I no longer wear, of questions I still haven't answered. And yet, it brings me peace. There's a comfort in surrounding yourself with the unfinished. It means you're still in motion, still asking, still alive. So tonight, I want to offer you this small reassurance. Your life doesn't have to be organized to be meaningful. Your space doesn't have to be aesthetic to be sacred. Your mess can be your map. Now, before we move on, would you like to meet the people who helped me stay sane through it all? Not the men, not the critics, not even the readers. I'm talking about my friends, the ones who knocked on my door with cheese and bad wine, the ones who said, "You're not crazy, you're just thinking too much," the ones who let me rage, doubt, collapse, and still called me brilliant. If you've ever had a friend like that, or if you've ever been that friend, then stay with me. Because next, I want to tell you why friendship might be the most radical thing we have left. Still awake? Truly impressive. Even my cat has yawned twice, and I'm the one doing all the talking here. Well then, since we're both still drifting in this sleepless little sea, let me share a rather prickly truth. Becoming an icon is the best way to never be truly heard again. You know what they do to icons, don't you? They frame them, print them on tote bags, attach catchy quotes we never actually said, and most of all, they simplify us. It's cleaner that way, easier to digest. No contradictions, no context. Just a symbol you can parade on a sticker or in a caption under a selfie. At some point, I stopped being a person you could argue with. I became a brand. Beauvoir became shorthand for feminism, for seriousness, for revolution, with a sprinkle of lipstick, if we're being cheeky. And that's lovely in a way. Except I wasn't here to be lovely. I was here to think. Sometimes I picture a young woman today scrolling past my face on a feminist carousel on Instagram with the quote, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman," written in pink cursive over a grainy photo of me looking intense. And I imagine her thinking, cool, next, and that's that. The idea scrolls away with the thumb. But I didn't write Le Deuxième Sexe for it to be a background aesthetic on someone's lock screen. I wrote it with blood and insomnia. I wrote it to make people think, not nod, not agree. Think. Being simplified is a form of erasure, you know. It's a way of being turned into a bedtime story with all the thorns removed. But I had thorns, still do, and ideas, still do. The point of philosophy is not to comfort you, it's to wake you up, ironically. And yet, here I am, lying in bed with a sleep mask and tepid chamomile, whispering to you in the dark, hoping to slip past your defenses like a soft rebellion. Because if there's one thing I want to offer, icon or not, it's the permission to think for yourself, fiercely, freely, without waiting for anyone's blessing, not even mine. So if someone ever quotes me to shut down your opinion, argue back. Use your own words. Tear mine apart if you need to. That's what I'm here for. I'd rather be wrong in your eyes than unchallenged in a museum. And now, let's leave the glass box behind, shall we? I want to tell you about something far less rigid, something warm, real, and quietly revolutionary. Let's talk about friendship. People don't talk enough about friendship. Real friendship. The kind that doesn't ask for selfies, status updates, or synchronized brunch schedules. The kind that says, I see your mind before your mascara. I hear your silence before your slogan. In a world obsessed with coupledom, I chose another kind of intimacy, one that didn't always involve tangled sheets or romantic declarations, but notebooks passed across cafe tables, eyes that sparked at the same paragraph, and long walks where two thoughts beat in time. My truest revolutions were often whispered over coffee, not shouted in protests. It was my friendships with Zaza, with Olga, with other women thinkers that allowed me to sharpen my voice without fearing its echo. These women challenged me, supported me, called out my contradictions. They didn't need me to be perfect, just present, just honest. There's something subversive in that, In a patriarchy that trains us to compete, to compare, to shrink in each other's shadows, choosing friendship is resistance. Deep, genuine friendship among women and gender minorities isn't just comforting, it's political. It rebuilds what the world tries to break. I remember once, curled up on a hotel bed with a friend after a long evening of lectures, we drank warm wine from paper cups and read each other our latest pages. She looked at me and said, "You're not alone in this." And she didn't mean the career or the cause. She meant the doubt, the exhaustion, the ache of trying to change a world that doesn't want to budge. That sentence stayed with me longer than any review. So if you're feeling like your ideas are too strange, your ambitions too much, or your fears too small, find someone who listens without flinching. Someone who sparks a fire instead of a spotlight. Someone who doesn't need you to be less just so they can be more. Friendship, in that sense, is not a detour from your path. It is the path. Choose people who make you want to stay curious. People who widen your questions instead of narrowing your answers. People who remind you that thinking together can be a kind of love. Because it is. Now, speaking of love, let's rewind time for a moment. There's something I never told my younger self, and maybe you need to hear it too. Still awake? My dear, either this story is too interesting, or your pillow has trust issues. Either way, I'm flattered. And since you're still listening, or half listening, let me speak now to the version of you that needed this years ago. When I was little, I thought the world had a plan for me. A quiet girl, a good girl, a brilliant girl. As long as I didn't make too much noise. I was supposed to smile modestly, learn my piano scales, marry a man with excellent posture, and discuss weather patterns at dinner. The script was written in ink I didn't choose. And still, I rehearsed. But inside me, there was always this trembling refusal, a voice I hadn't yet learned to trust, a question that ruined every polite conversation. What if I want more? I wish someone had told me that this question wasn't selfish, that wanting more didn't make me ungrateful. It made me alive. I wish someone had whispered, even just once, "You are not too much. The world is simply too narrow." So let me be that someone now. To the part of you that's scared of disappointing others. To the part of you that edits yourself down to fit someone else's comfort zone. To the part of you that still believes love must be earned, that success must be pretty, that rebellion must be loud. Here's the truth, as gently as I can say it. You do not have to be liked to be lovable. You do not have to be approved to be valid. You do not have to be perfect to begin. The fear of disappointing others, parents, lovers, teachers, society, is the first leash, and we carry it for years, even long after we've unhooked it. We hear their voices when we choose a dress, decline a job, post a photo. We wait for permission, for applause, for someone to say, "Yes, you're doing it right." But there is no right. There is only real. And sometimes real is messy, loud, quiet, awkward, defiant, glorious. I wish someone had told me that identity isn't a performance, it's a practice. That you don't become yourself in one radiant moment. You become yourself 100 quiet times a day when you choose truth over convenience, curiosity over certainty, and kindness over conformity. And I wish someone had told me that even when you feel most alone, there are others, maybe miles away, maybe not even born yet, who will recognize your voice like a lighthouse in their own storm. Maybe you're one of them. Maybe that's why you're still awake. So tonight, I want to offer you this. It's okay to not know who you are yet. It's okay to unlearn, to rebuild, to dream differently than you were taught. It's okay to rest, and it's okay to want more. Now, breathe with me, because soon, very soon, I'm going to ask you the only question that matters. Ready? So, what now? After all the books, all the bold ideas, all the tisanes that cooled before I remembered to drink them, what does one do with so much awareness? You listened to me talk about childhood dresses that itched like expectations, about rooms filled with smoke and men and words I wasn't supposed to say, about love, messy and fierce and uncontainable, about feminism and its enemies, some of them wearing lipstick and smiling politely. And now you're lying there, under your covers, maybe feeling a little too seen, or a little too awake, or a little bit both. So let me offer this. Start small. There's this myth, especially today, that awakening must come with fireworks, with hashtags. With revolutions you can measure in followers, but I believe in quiet revolutions, in the tiny acts that no one sees but you. Like saying no when you were always told to say yes. Like choosing silence, not out of fear, but out of peace. Like loving someone, truly loving them, without needing to shrink yourself to be loved back. You don't need to burn the world down. Just stop pretending you're not on fire. And if you are on fire, might I suggest opening a window, metaphorically or not? Before we go any further, if you've made it this far and haven't yet liked or subscribed, well, even Simone de Beauvoir liked a bit of validation now and then, especially at 3 a.m. with messy hair and ink-stained fingers. So go ahead, click the thing. I won't tell Sartre. Now back to you. You see, I never wanted to be a statue or a slogan. I wanted to be alive, to evolve, to doubt myself, to be read and then challenged. That's the whole point of thinking. Not to freeze ideas into dogma, but to let them dance, to let them breathe. So please, don't quote me. Surprise me. Live in ways I didn't predict. Find truths I was too tired or too scared to see. Make feminism more generous than I ever made it. Make freedom less lonely. The beauty of ideas is that they outgrow their authors. And you, whoever you are, woman, man, neither, both, undecided at the moment, you are part of this evolution. The next page of the book I began scribbling in the dark, long before it was cool to call yourself a philosopher. You don't have to be perfect, just present. That's enough. You can start tonight, not by fixing the world, but by refusing to betray yourself in small ways. Maybe tomorrow you'll walk a little differently. Say no with less guilt. Say yes with more joy. Maybe you'll unfollow someone who makes you feel small, or send a message to someone who once made you feel seen. Maybe you'll let your tired body rest without shame, or wake up ready to scream a little louder, love a little deeper, change your life a little bit at a time. The truth is, freedom isn't a destination, it's a direction. And rest, real rest, is not laziness. It's rebellion. You are not a machine. You are a person. And that, my dear insomniac, is enough. So now, let's put down the armor. Let go of the performative awakeness. No one's watching. Just you. And me. And maybe the moon. Breathe in. Deeper. Feel the sheets. Hear the quiet. Notice how, even in stillness, you are alive. You've made it through a storm of thoughts. You've listened. You've wondered. You've been brave enough to stay awake with me. That counts for something. And now, let the thoughts loosen. Let the words melt into dreams. Let the noise dissolve, like sugar in chamomile. You don't need to figure it all out tonight. You don't need to become someone new before sunrise. You just need to sleep. The kind of sleep that doesn't ask for permission. The kind of sleep that trusts tomorrow will still be here, waiting. You're allowed to rest. Even revolutionaries have to close their eyes. So here's my final whisper to you. Good night, my thoughtful friend. And may you wake up just a little more free